Welcome viewers. In this lecture, I will be discussing about how to create and manage organizational culture. A learning objective is defining organizational culture. We will list characteristics of organizational culture, differentiate a weak culture and a strong culture, dominant culture from various subcultures, identify characteristics of a strong culture and explain how a culture can be sustained over a period of time. We will further learn how employees can adapt or learn organization's culture. So, to begin with the discussion, I would like to cite a case of Charles Schwab and Company's acquisition of US Trust in the year 2000. As we know, when two organizations merge, there is an issue which emerges, that is cultural integration. So, integration challenges associated with acquisition of US Trust by Charles Schwab, where US cultural values have been underestimated or ignored. Cultural clash is one of the problems which have emerged due to this integration. US Trust is a prestigious, long standing wealth manager which had a culture of client service. Schwab, known for its discount brokerage route, struggled to blend its tech based culture with its relationship driven, high touch service of US Trust, leading to employee turnover and cultural misalignment. So, this is one example of integration failure. This case highlights that when acquiring companies with strong established reputations, failing to recognize deeply held cultural norms such as client interaction styles and internal hierarchy chain of command, which dictates a behavior of employees, can jeopardize the success of the merger. So, when an organization during the integration or during acquisition ignore the cultural values which are deeply ingrained in both the organizations, so there is likely chance of a failure. So, this case illustrates that neglecting the human and cultural elements can often result in failure of the acquisition. So, with this background, we would like to discuss about organizational culture. So, culture is basically the shared values and norms that controls organizational members' interaction with each other and with the people outside the organization. It can be a source of competitive advantage, can be used to increase organizational effectiveness. If both the organizations which are planning to merge or which have merged understand what are the roots of organizational culture, how is a culture formed, and how does it affect the behavior of employees, and they can help understand the background behind the organization's culture, the values, norms which are shaping the culture of an organization and ultimately the behavior of people. There can be an effective integration or merger. So, what is organizational culture? It's a degree of responsibility, freedom, and independence. It's a degree of aggressiveness, innovation, and risk taking. When the organizations have clear objectives and performance expectation, the degree to which units are encouraged to operate in a coordinated manner, how much the harmony is maintained across the organization, the degree to which managers are given clear communication, assistance, support to subordinates, the rules and regulations are very clearly explained in order to control the employee behavior. Members identify with the organizations. Reward allocation is based on employees' performance criteria. The employees are encouraged to criticize openly. Communication patterns are formal, hierarchical. It defines the organization's culture. When there is a degree of communication patterns which are forming hierarchy. Organization culture, the basic pattern of organizational culture is defined as a basic pattern of shared values and assumptions which is governing the way employees within an organization think about and act on problems and opportunities. Charles Schwab and Company's acquisition of US Trust in 2000 has faced significant integration challenges as the deeply ingrained US cultural values have been ignored or underestimated. Executives of Charles Schwab and Company ignored the influence of organizational culture on the behavior of employees. Culture do play a role in defining the employee behavior. So, we understand what are the elements of organizational culture. Some aspects of culture are visible, whereas some aspects are not visible, they are hidden below the surface. What are these elements of organizational culture? Artifacts, shared values, and shared assumptions. What is visible is the artifact, that is, the stories, legends, rituals, ceremonies, organizational language or lingo, physical structure, and the decor. Shared values consist of conscious belief, evaluate what is good or bad, right or wrong, and shared assumptions are unconscious, taken for granted perceptions or belief. These are the mental models or beliefs of ideals. Meaning of cultural content. Cultural content refers to relative ordering of beliefs, values, and assumptions. For example, a software company has an employee focused culture that emphasizes the work life balance, where people have been given freedom to or flexibility to work from anywhere. They can balance their work life as well as their family life. An organization emphasizes on a handful of values out of dozens of hundreds of values that exist. There is also a subculture within a culture. Subculture is located throughout the organization, can enhance or oppose counterculture, firm's dominant culture. Two functions of counterculture, which provide surveillance and critics, ethics, source of emerging values. I will discuss about Mayo Clinic and how it deciphers its culture. To decipher its culture and identify ways to reinforce it, at the two newer sites, Mayo Clinic retained an anthropologist who shadowed employees, joined physicians on patient visits, and posed as a patient to observe what happens in the waiting room. Apollo's anthem also conveys culture. Apollo anthem serves as a cultural cornerstone for Apollo hospitals, representing unity, passion, commitment to patient care amongst its employees. It is frequently sung during the Founders' Day. In the early morning, the operation begins. Celebrations to honor Dr. Pratap Reddy, reinforcing the institution's values of empathy, integrity, and responsibility. The anthem fosters a sense of belongingness, sense of pride, transforming the workplace as a temple of healing. Artifacts, stories, and legends, social prescriptions of desired or undesired behavior, provides a realistic human side to expectations. Most effective stories and legends describe the real people, assumed to be true. It is known throughout the organization and they are more prescriptive in nature. So, stories, symbols, artifacts, they have a role to play in forming organizational culture. Like, for example, stories of stone lions at IIT Roorkee and the stories of the stories, symbols, rituals which are part of any organization. The stories of the founding fathers, Jamshedji Tata's stories have helped shape the philanthropic culture at Tata's. So, all these are examples of how stories and legends have shaped the organization's culture. Artifacts, rituals, and ceremonies. Rituals are programmed routines, how visitors are being greeted, patients' queries are taken care of. The ceremonies, that is, planned activities for an audience like award ceremonies, how the employees are being recognized. So, all these are certain examples of part of culture. Artifacts, organizational languages, Organizational language is also another part of artifacts. Organizational language, words used to address people, describe customers, etc. Leaders use phrases and special vocabularies as cultural symbol, referring to clients rather than customers. Language also found in subcultures, Whirlpool, PowerPoint culture. Physical structure and symbols like building structure may shape and reflect culture. For example, the headquarters look like headquarters representing the eyewear and clothing company, protective culture. Office design conveys cultural meaning. Building structure may shape and reflect culture. For example, Oakley's interplanetary headquarters look like a vault representing the eyewear and clothing company's protective culture. The State Bank of India, the physical structure represents that they are customer friendly. The office design conveys the cultural meaning. The furniture, office size, wall hangings, all of them convey that they are more customer friendly. What are organizational values? Values are basically the general criteria, standards, or guiding principles that people use to determine which type of behavior, events, situations, and outcomes are desirable or undesirable. There are terminal values and instrumental values. Terminal values are desired end state or outcome that people seek to achieve. Instrumental values are a desired mode of behavior. Then organizational values which are embedded in formal and informal structure like norms and norms, standards or styles of behavior that are considered acceptable or typical for a group of people. Formal structure values are embedded in a company's standard operating procedures, rules, goals. So, organizational values, there are terminal values and instrumental values. Terminal values basically desired end states or outcomes. For example, terminal values are desired end states or outcomes. For example, high quality is the terminal value, excellence, standards to be maintained. Instrumental values are basically the desired models of behavior. For example, being helpful, working hard, giving effort towards getting an outcome like extraordinary effort. So, all these are instrumental values, and this is leading to specific norms, rules, and standard operating procedures. For example, being courteous towards the co-workers or the customers, getting the workplace, tidying up the workplace area. So, all these are outcome of terminal values and instrumental values. Organizational culture is also defined based on the enduring values embodied in organizational norms, rules, standard operating procedures, and goals. People draw on these cultural values to guide their actions and decisions when faced with uncertainty or ambiguity. Important influence on members' behavior and response to situations. So, how this culture plays a role in organizational effectiveness? How does culture, the symbols, rituals, artifacts, the terminal and instrumental values play an important role in defining the effectiveness of an organization? In order to understand the effect of culture on organizational effectiveness, we need to first differentiate a strong culture from a weak culture. What is a strong culture? Strong culture is characterized by organizations' core values, held intensely, clearly ordered, and widely shared. I will quote an example here. We know that there are some organizations which are very sustainable, like Johnson and Johnson, Tata's, Reliance Industries. There are various educational institutions like BITS Pilani, IITs, the older IITs. They are more than 100 years old. These organizations have a strong history. Their founders have laid down principles, value systems. There are stories of the founders, their principles, which have been instrumental in developing the strong culture. So, these organizations, they have been characterized by the organization's core values, which are held intensely, clearly ordered, and widely shared. And these organizations have been sustainable because of the strong culture led by their founders, the culture has been widely shared between members, and there are various ways through which they have tried to explain the core values, principles which guide the behavior of employees. So, organizations that are younger or have constant turnover amongst their members, where members often leave after gaining some experience, like experience of couple of years. So, almost by definition will have a very weak culture because people do not stay in that organization for long. So, because members will not have shared enough experience to create a common understanding about the core values. So, what we understand is those organizations where members stay for a longer period of time, where members share the values, values are widely shared between members, and where the principles, values, they shape the behavior of employees. So, those organizations will obviously have an effective performance because they know each role will have certain expected standards. So, we will understand that benefits of a strong organizational culture is they have social control, control over people's behavior. It's like a social glue. If they are somewhere, there is a culture to control their behavior. I will be citing one example. As I said that Johnson and Johnson has a strong culture. So, there were instances like there used to be certain crisis which has emanated. I would like to cite an example. There was a product which was tampered, Johnson and Johnson's product like painkiller Tylenol, which had been tampered, and as a result there were few people who suffered. There were few deaths which were reported in UK. So, immediately the product was withdrawn. Those the managers who were controlling, who were aware about this particular instance or the crisis, they immediately uh, took decision to withdraw the product, immediately dismantle the product or to destroy the product, because this is a problem which has to be curbed, and they had to safeguard the image or identity of the organization. So, this shows that a strong culture, people are generally, they imbibe the value system, the principles, mission of organization. What is the purpose of the organization? They try to safeguard the image and identity. This instance says that the strong culture has an impact on organizational performance. It's like a social glue, one after the other. People's behavior is shaped by the organization's value system. Improving sense making. So, strong culture where there is a social control, social glue, and it improves sense making. Problems do arise with strong culture. Culture content might be misaligned with the organizational environment. Strong culture may focus on mental models that could be limiting. Strong culture can also, to some extent, suppress dissenting values from subcultures. And adaptive organizational culture, where there is an external focus, firm's success depends on continuous change. Those culture which are adapting to change, and they also continue to grow. So, adaptive organizational culture, it focuses on processes more than the goals, how the processes need to be improvised, strong sense of ownership, and it is very proactive, seeks out opportunities. Then we will also discuss about the organization culture fit perspective. Successful organizations will seek a good internal fit with their culture, properly matched to their technology. Routine technologies provide stability and work well when it is linked to culture that emphasizes centralized decision making and limited individual initiative. In contrast, non-routine technology, on the other hand, require adaptability and are best when it is matched with culture that encourage individual initiative and downplay control. Organizational culture and ethics. Executives view organizational culture as one of the three main influencers on business ethics. Culture has an ethical problem when it is very strong. Organizational culture also has an ethical problem when it is strong. Difference in global values and norms. A country's culture can affect the values and norms of a company or a company's culture. differences in communication style, attitude towards competing tasks, and different to decision making can impact a company's culture. And executives working abroad need to be sensitive to both the country's culture and the company's culture. Recognizing the differences, many mergers between companies have failed because of differences in organizational culture. Merger teams now exist to help smooth the transition between two cultures. Bicultural audit, part of due diligence in merger, uh, minimizes risk of cultural collision by diagnosing companies before merger. There are three steps of bicultural audit: examines the artifacts, analyze data of cultural conflict, compatibility, identify strategies and action plans to bridge the cultures. Merging organizational cultures, we need to take care of assimilation, deculturalization, integration and separation. What is assimilation? Acquired company embraces acquiring firm's cultural values. Deculturalization is acquiring firm imposes its culture on unwilling acquired firm. Integration is cultures combine into a new composite culture, and separation is merging companies remain separate with their own culture. When mergers happen, organizations need to or understand that these are different aspects: assimilation, deculturalization, integration and separation. So now the question comes, how to create, sustain and transmit culture. An organizational culture does not develop out of thin air, it does not develop on its own. Once established, it rarely fades away. What forces or influence the creation of a culture? How cultures are created? So, what we understand from the discussion beforehand, organizational culture are shaped by the founders. Founders' vision or mission have a major impact in establishing the early culture. For example, Thomas Watson's views on research and development, product innovation, employees' dress code, and compensation policies are all evident at IBM, even though he passed away in 1956. IBM's culture is because of Thomas Watson's ideology, his value system. Organizations' culture, custom, traditions, and general way of doing things are largely driven by what it has done before and the degree of success it has achieved. So, how do we strengthen organizational culture? Actions of founders and leaders. As we have already discussed, Tatas are known and are sustaining, are examples of sustainable organizations because of the ideologies of Jamshedji Tata. The Parsi value system of concern for people has been imbibed in the formation of core values of actions of founders and leaders. Then culturally consistent rewards. Say for example, culturally consistent rewards, aligning artifacts, selecting and socializing employees are all factors behind strengthening organizational culture. So, the culture of an organization is strengthened by the value system of founders if there is a constant reward for performance, which has been, if there is employees have been rewarded for their commitment, rewarded for any kind of contribution, commitment, sincerity, this has been a continuous policy. So, obviously, this will strengthen organization's culture. Artifacts, selecting and socializing employees, how the employees socialize. For example, in this case, the values of an organization, they know that if an organization emphasizes on innovation, if the organization gives emphasis to creation of new knowledge, so they need to spread an awareness, they need to educate employees that they need to share their ideas, socialization is being given. Then how cultures are sustained or transmitted? Once a culture is in place, there are forces within the organization that act to maintain it by giving employees a set of similar experience. There are three forces that play most important role in sustaining a culture, like organization selection practices. They need to select people who are very aligned to organization's values. Action of top management and organizational socialization methods. The organization selection practices, like the explicit goal of selection process is to identify and hire individuals who have the knowledge, skills and abilities in order to perform the job within the organization successfully. But typically more than one candidate will meet any given job requirements, and final decisions of whom to hire will be influenced by the decision maker's judgment of how well the candidate will fit into the organization and its culture. Hiring of people with common values, essentially consistent with those of the organizational values. So, if an organization emphasizes on hard work, sincerity, so they will try to identify the individual whose value system is ingrained, whose values also reflect the same values of organization. Action of top management also have a major impact on the organization's culture. Employees observe management's behavior in organization. These convey whether the risk taking is desirable, how much freedom managers should give their subordinates, what is the appropriate dress code, what actions will pay off in terms of pay raises, promotion and rewards and the like. The third aspect is organizational socialization, the process by which individuals learn the values, expected behavior, and social knowledge necessary to assume their role in organization. Socialization is a process by which members learn and imbibe values or internalize the values and norms of an organization's culture. So, these are various ways through which culture is transmitted or transferred from one member to another. Organizational culture is transmitted to individuals. Socialization, nothing but learning, and it's a process of learning and adjustment. Now, what is a learning process? Newcomers join organizations, they make sense to organizations, physical, social, and strategic cultural dynamics, sense of identification with the organization. They try to imbibe those values. When the values of individuals align with organizational values, it will help them to associate with every aspect, try to be more committed towards the organization's goals, and this will reflect in performance. Adjustment process. Newcomers need to adapt to their new environment. Of course, it is very difficult for a person to quickly adapt to the new culture, new roles, and team norms or corporate cultural values. But slowly, during the process of socialization, people slowly try to adjust to the new environment. Newcomers need to adapt to the new environment or work environment. There are various stages of socialization: pre employment stage, encounter stage, and role management stage. Pre encounter stage, when an outsider joins an organization, quickly gathers information, forms a psychological contract, that means understands how to be associated with organization. In the encounter stage, newcomer has already joined and has taken up an assignment or a role, and it is testing the expectations. Before joining, they have a predefined or a preset understanding about organization and the various facilities they would be getting in the organization. So, once they join, they try to test the expectations, what they previously had and what they are getting in reality. Role management is insider, when they have already taken up a role and they are quickly adjusting to the role, changing roles and behavior, they start learning the work, and there are times when there is an internal conflict or there is a role conflict. They may not adjust to that role, but they have to quickly adapt. So, pre-employment socialization, conflicts are always there. Firm sells the job and company hides negative information. Sometimes there are certain instances where the employee's personal values may not be allowing the person go with what is assigned in the role. Sometimes when there are certain instances of crisis or certain products which are defective, but the firm hides or the company hides negative information in public. So there is role conflict. Applicant polishes up the resume to look good. Pre-employment socialization conflicts may arise, individual artifacts. Realistic job preview, a balance of positive and negative information about job and work context. Benefits of realistic job preview: less turnover, high performance, less reality shock, vaccination effect, and builds loyalty. To continue with our discussion of how culture spreads, I will cite one example of Whole Food, how it spreads its culture. When expanding operations, Whole Foods Market maintains its culture through yogurt culture strategy. This is a kind of socialization process in which current employees who carry the grocer's unique culture are transferred to new stores, so recently hired employees will learn and embrace the culture more quickly. We see this kind of say spread of culture in almost all the retail stores where they have spread the culture for being customer friendly. Culture is transmitted in addition to explicit orientation and training programs. Culture is transmitted to employees in a number of other forms, the most potent being through stories, rituals, symbols, language. So, culture for performance, culture for creativity, culture for knowledge sharing, all these, or culture for being customer friendly, all these concepts have emanated, and where either through training program or through the stories which have been shared widely across the employees. So, organizational culture is transmitted to its members through role orientation, the institutionalized role orientation or individualized role orientation. What is role orientation? The characteristic way in which newcomers respond to a particular situation. Individualized role orientation results when individuals are allowed and encouraged to be creative and to experiment with the changing norms and values. Whereas institutionalized role orientation results when individuals are taught to respond to a new context in the same way that existing organizational members have been doing or have been responding to. For example, the institutionalized orientation can be collective, formal, sequential, fixed, serial, and divestiture, and the tactics which have been carried in case of individualized orientation is individual, informal, random, variable, disjunctive, and investiture. Let us understand what is collective tactics, what is individualized tactics. Collective tactics, the newcomers, it provides newcomers with a common learning experience designed to produce a standardized response in a situation. Individualized tactics, each newcomer's learning experiences are unique, and newcomers can learn new appropriate responses for each situation. What is formal and informal tactics through which culture is transmitted? Formal tactics is used in context of institutionalized orientation. Formal tactics like segregate newcomers from existing organizational members during the learning process. During the learning process, it's an early socialization process where they are forming the new value system, their behavior is molded in the new organizational context. So, they are learning the formal tactics. Informal tactics, newcomers learn on the job as members of a team. Sequential versus random tactics, adapting culture or learning culture. Sequential tactics is provide newcomers with explicit information about the sequence in which they will perform, laying down list of information about the sequence in which they will perform new activities or occupy new roles as they advance in organizations. On the other hand, random tactics is training is based on the interest and needs of the individual newcomers, because there is no set sequence of the newcomers progression in the organization. What is fixed and what is a variable tactics? Fixed tactics gives newcomers precise knowledge of the timetable associated with completing each stage in the learning process. There is a well placed timetable or action plan to complete each stage in the learning process. whereas variable tactics provide no such timetable or no information about newcomers, how the newcomers, when they will reach a certain stage in the learning process. Serial versus disjunctive tactics. Serial tactics is employed, existing organizational members act as a role model or mentor for newcomers. Senior members who act as role models or mentors to explain how to behave in a particular situation and how to take decisions. Disjunctive process require newcomers to figure out and develop on their own way of behaving. Divestiture versus investiture tactics. Divestiture tactics talk newcomers receive negative social support and existing organizational members withhold support until newcomers learn and ropes and conform to established norms. Investiture tactics, newcomers immediately receive a positive social support from other organizational members and are encouraged to be on their own or themselves. Moving forward, we would also like to discuss about the stories, ceremonies and organizational language. Organizational rites are rites of passage, rites of integration, rites of enhancement. Rites of passage marks an individual's entry to promotion, departure from the organization. Rites of integration, it talks about the shared announcement of success, office parties, and the cookouts. These are various informal ways of socialization. Rites of enhancement, public recognition of somebody, rewarding employees for their contribution. It helps in making them accept the culture as well as for socialization, as well as giving them to enhance their position in the eyes of the other employees. So, organizational rights can be the rights of passage, rights of integration, and rights of enhancement. Examples of these rights are rights of passage is induction and the basic training. And what is the purpose of this right is learn and internalize norms and values. Rights of passage, which marks an individual's entry to promotion in and departure from the organization. Rights of integration, which talks about sharing announcements of organizational success, office parties, and cookouts. This is one such example is organizing events like birthday parties, Christmas parties. The purpose of this right is to build common norms and values. People start socializing and understand each other from close quarters. This helps in building common norms and values. Rights of enhancement, when somebody is recognized, public recognition, rewards of for employee contribution. So, in the form of presentation during annual award ceremony, or this is helping the employee feel motivate commitment to norms and values. Where does organizational values come from? It comes from interaction of four factors: the personal and professional characteristics of people within organization, organizational ethics, the property rights that the organization gives to employees, and the structure of the organization. So, it helps in forming the organization's culture. Characteristics of people through the process of hiring people that match existing culture, people become more and more similar over time. Organizational ethics, the more values, belief, and rules that establish the appropriate way of organizational stakeholders to deal with one another and with the environment. It is derived from the personality and belief of the founder and top management. The factors influencing the development of organizational ethics, societal or organizational ethics, the moral values, belief, and rules that establish the appropriate way for organizational stakeholders to deal with one another and with the organization's environment helps in forming the professional ethics and individual ethics. Culture also comes from organizational structure. Mechanistic and organic structure. Mechanistic structure like predictability and stability are, are desired goals. Organic structure emphasizes on innovation and flexibility are desired end states. Centralized versus decentralization. Decentralization encourages rewards, creativity, innovation. Centralization reinforces obedience and accountability. So, How can an organization's culture be managed? Changing a culture can be very difficult. It's hard to understand how the previous four factors interact. Major alterations are sometimes needed. Some ways culture can be changed: redesigning structure, revising the property rights to motivate people, changing the people, especially the top management. Property rights that an organization gives to members to receive and use resources. The distribution of property rights to different stakeholders determines how effective an organization is. The culture that emerges from the organization. Social responsibility talks about referring to a manager's duty or obligation to make decisions that nurture, protect, enhance, and promote the welfare and well being of stakeholders and society as a whole. What are various approaches to social responsibility? Obstructionist approach and defensive approach. Low end of the organization's commitment to social responsibility. Managers choose to behave unethically and illegally. Defensive approach is minimum commitment to ethical behavior. Managers attempt to stay with the law but do not attempt social responsibility beyond what is required by the law. There are various approaches to social responsibility like accommodative approach, proactive approach. The accommodative approach gives an acknowledgement to the need of support social responsibility. Managers want to make right choice when called on to do so. Proactive approach actively embraces the need to behave in socially responsible way. Managers go out of their way to learn about needs of different stakeholder groups, willing to utilize organizational resources to promote interest not only of the stockholders but stakeholders. So there are various approaches of social responsibility like obstructionist approach, defensive approach, accommodative approach, and a proactive approach. Why the organizations are socially responsible? Workers and society benefits directly because organizations bear some cost of helping workers. Quality of life as a whole would be higher as a climate of caring is encouraged. Is it the right thing to do? Companies act responsibly towards their stakeholders' benefit from increasing business and seeing the profit rise. And there is another concept of whistleblower, a person who reports illegal or unethical behavior, takes a stand against unscrupulous managers or stakeholders. So, evidence has suggested that managers who behave socially responsible in the long run benefit all organizational stakeholders. We have also discussed about the culture as a set of values, shared values, beliefs, norms which control the behavior of employees in the organization. We discussed about the characteristics of organizational culture, differentiated dominant culture from various subcultures. We further explored the characteristics of a strong culture and how a strong culture can be a barrier to strong culture can be a barrier at times. We identified characteristics of a strong culture. Further, we also discussed about, so concluding the discussion, we have in this lecture, we have discussed about various factors of organizational culture. We have defined organizational culture in details, various characteristics of organizational culture. We further also explained the dominant culture from the various subcultures, how dominant culture uh, is formed, and we have also discussed about the characteristics of a strong culture and what how it is different from a weak culture, how culture is sustained over a period of time, and we've learned how employees learn an organization's culture, how culture is created and culture is maintained. Thank you.